whenever crises pop up, they challenge our assumptions. And the more connected or married we stay to those assumptions, the more stifled we're going to be moving through it. So what I mean by this is, for example, I always thought my business has to look a certain way, or has to exist in a certain space, or it has to, X, Y, or Z thing. We moved twice. At one point, we were operating just as a holdover in some sketchy part of downtown Boston that was like 800 square feet, smaller than by 400 or 500 square feet our first space. And it had a spiral staircase inside of it. It was totally meant to be a WeWork, like mini, office space, not a classroom at all, or like a studio at all. And we converted this into our music studio, and it worked. I've operated, as I said, in an apartment before. It's amazing how when you just open up to creative possibility, and in this case, it was forced upon me to do that because we had no other option. We didn't see a huge dip in the business. It was amazing. People followed us. I'd say we were able to retain through all of that chaos. We were able to retain about 80% of our base. So it's pretty unbelievable if we just kind of latch on and trust that our assumptions will be challenged, but just to see what happens. And I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised by the outcome, that it's not at all what we thought had to happen in order for things to succeed or for us to get through it.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We have our all-time most attending guest on the podcast back today, Alyssa, who's been with us a number of times this year already. We did that financial episode earlier this year, and then we've done a number of roundtables. And I love the roundtable episodes because we ask one question of each person, and then we get these different perspectives on the topic of the day. And it's not so much about the story, so to speak, but kind of what we learned coming out of it. Because I don't know about you guys, but for me, hearing someone's takeaways from something they went through in life helps prevent me from making those mistakes too. And so, as we said in the last episode, if our lives can be a giant warning sign to everyone in the audience, we'll have done our job today. So, welcome back, Alyssa. I'm really happy you're here.
Welcome, Alyssa.
Good to be here. Excited for this.
Yeah. So today's topic is managing a crisis in your school, managing a crisis in your business. And Nate, I want to jump in right off the bat with a question for you. And obviously, Alyssa, you can answer as well, but I thought I would just single Nate out here. Nate, what makes a crisis a crisis? What are we talking about here?
Nice. And I for the longest time, I didn't really know, because early on in my business, or in the business, whichever one it was, but in Brooklyn Music Factory, I sort of viewed everything like mini crises. I don't know about you guys, but it was I always felt like that there was an issue and that it was my job as co-founder to solve it. I soon learned, well, not soon, I'd say over the first 6 years, I learned that actually the definition of crises for me, Daniel, is it business threatening? Will the business close if we don't manage this? And so that's very different than a fire. Like a teacher quitting is not a crisis. Likely that's not going to close your business. A billing audit that shows that you didn't collect on $5,000, depending on the size of your school, is likely not a crisis. It's just a total bummer. So anyways, that's how I define it. I think in Brooklyn Music Factory's history, we've had 3 major crises, and we've dealt with all of them because we're going stronger than ever now. So anyways, that's my answer. How about you, Alyssa? What do you think about How do you define crisis?
I mean, I think that's so brilliant too, to define there's variances of this. And I also feel, people who are relatively new to running a studio can rightfully so feel like some things that we might not consider are a crisis, right? Because I think at one point it does feel like it. And I think it's all about the feeling space that we're in, that for me would define what a crisis is. And then I think we learn and grow. It's like a pressure cooker. Life is a pressure cooker. We continuously go through larger and larger lessons that I think help to expand our emotional bandwidth to be able to then have these different, like I'd say, colors of crises, right? But and then maybe instead of like a pressure cooker, it's a slow simmer, right? There's things that we can find a little bit more composure going through because we've had that life and business experience. But this is for me. I definitely can remember the days where losing a teacher did feel like a crisis. So it's all good. I'd say for me, I define a crisis as something that immobilizes me, something that makes me feel like I have lost control, that I'm out of my zone of control, and that the outcome is not looking so good. So I guess I base it more on a feeling space, and then I can recognize that I've arrived there.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to all this is that, and this maybe is getting a little bit away from the question itself, but the reward for overcoming a crisis, the reward for working through this feeling space, as you talked about, is you get to inherit bigger problems and bigger crises in the future. And while it might sound like I'm trying to be funny, it's actually true. When you go through these things, it expands your ability to lead, and more than often, you have to rise to a challenge that you might not have been equipped for before, and going through it, you actually build something bigger on the other side. And I know I picked one specific one today to talk about because I could mention several, but as I look back at the various things that were quote unquote threatening, what I had to learn and do and develop emotionally even resulted in a better business afterwards, and the capacity to build my business bigger after that point.
Mm-hmm. So Daniel, on this note, I'm eager to hear, what was your crisis that taught you how to rise to, a different level of challenge and expand your own emotional bandwidth?
Right. So I thought about a number of things, and I picked something that came post studio, but it is something that applies to anyone who has a music school. And the reason I picked this is because just in the last 10 years that my studio and school were still operating, there's nothing I can identify as a business closing threat. But there was something in the context of Grow that I think would be applicable to everyone who's listening. And that is, when we began, we had a certain marketing style that we were using. We were largely social media based. We were largely content marketing based. And for the first 4 years that Grow was in existence, 2016 to 2020, that is how we continually grew the business, met new people, and that sort of thing. And then around COVID, and it had nothing to do with the fact that COVID was there, but around COVID, we really wanted to start expanding our paid marketing. And long story short, we spent the better part of a year developing a paid sales funnel in conjunction with a really high-powered Facebook ads guy. And that just took our revenue to the moon. It was insane how we turned this thing on, and we had a few misfires at the beginning just as we were experimenting, but we turned this thing on and just we couldn't spend ad money fast enough, because for every dollar we were spending, we were getting like $4 to $6 back. And then the Facebook 14.5 update happened. This was about a year later. And I mean, we were just all high on the hog here. I mean, everybody was just so excited. The team was excited. I was excited personally. And then 14.5 happens. And literally within 8 weeks, this sales funnel that had just been going gangbusters was completely dead. And there are stories from around the larger business world of things like this happening, but it happened to us. And it was so bad that the guy that I was working with literally went into a semi-retirement. He said, "This is happening with everybody." And he's like, "I'm just kind of through with this." And I got the sense that he had been so successful in kind of, the previous, that it wasn't really going to harm him financially. He just was like, "I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to wait for the dust to settle. I'm going to get back into the industry." I couldn't do that. We had sales to make. We had expanded the team because of this boom, so to speak. And what happened and this is maybe where I'll just kind of in the summary, and if you guys have questions for me, I'm happy to go into it. But over the next 18 months, we really struggled because we couldn't just go back to what we had been doing before. The industry had changed. There were a lot more would-be coaches who kind of like put a sign out and said, hey, I'm going to do this stuff. There's people that are copying me still to this day, who kind of stole my messaging and were, putting out alternative products. I mean, it's even happened again this year. Products that aren't as good. And just the point I'm getting at is that I was really, really concerned. I was concerned about having to let people go. I was concerned about, being able to make, and yeah. So that's the summary. That's what happened.
Daniel, you bring up, I was just jotting in my notes here as I do on an app like this. A weakness plus a threat equals a crisis. Now, the threat is always defined for me. My mentors always said a threat is defined as an outside influence. So back to your comment, Alyssa, it's like outside of our sphere of control, right? And this Facebook 14.5 to me is like probably the most classic version,
yes,
right, of an outside threat,
textbook,
an outside influence where you just you have no control over that, obviously, right? And the industry changing is another version of that, right? Where you're like, the industry has changed. We can't control when people swipe our products. Like, it reminds me of when this school in upstate New York swiped the entire Brooklyn Music Factory school down to the product suite and the name, with a slight shift. And I was like, I was mortified. Then eventually someone said to me, Daniel, they're like, actually, it's the greatest form of flattery.
Doesn't feel that way in the moment, though, does it?
It sure as hell doesn't feel like you're like, wait a minute, who do I hire to write a cease and desist letter? Anyways, my follow-up question for you in the moment, because you sort of touched on it, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more of what it felt like in that moment. Like, because you're pretty damn pragmatic. Like, you will attack something, but get into the heart of it. Like, what did you actually feel in that moment around Grow and yourself?
I think it was my version of panicking, which, if this had happened 10 years ago, it might have killed me. But I think it was definitely like, it was a moment. Yeah, boy, it was a moment where for the first time in a long time, I didn't have an immediate answer or solution. And that's very unusual for me. I really, and that's where kind of that panic set in but then coming out of that was then this resolved, well, marketing's marketing. So at the end of the day, this is just the universe telling us that we have to level up again. We have to up our game. And before, we did up our game by building that Facebook funnel, but it was on our timetable. We had a few misfires over the previous 9 months before we got it right. There was no pressure there. At the end of 2019, when we started experimenting with the Facebook funnel, we had just released a new product. We'd done the beta with it. It had done very, very well. And we were in this sales cycle of releasing our marketing training twice a year, and tons of cash would come in the spring and in the fall. And then we had, ongoing sales throughout the year. My point is that when the funnel went away and all of a sudden that predictable and steady source of income went away, now we had the opportunity to experiment and do something new, but now we were under a time crunch, which I hadn't been before. And it lasted longer than I thought it was going to take. And so that's how I felt.
Before I pick it back to you, Alyssa, can I just zero in on one comment you made, Daniel? You said 10 years ago it would have killed me. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, because therein lies that development, Alyssa, I think you were referencing earlier.
Yeah.
Alyssa and I did a video a couple of years ago where we talked about how hiring a business coach for ourselves changed our career and really, really helped us. And so that comment is really a hat tip to that concept, where the business coach I worked with, and we'll link this in the show notes, but the business coach I worked with, I hired him to help me grow the business. What I didn't realize I was going to get from him was someone who didn't see a difference between, no, let me rephrase this. The business coach I hired was more interested in the person, not the business. And so he looked into me and he saw the things that were brittle in me. He saw the things that were holding me back, and he went to work on those traits in me. And by working on those things, it made the business better, because the business, if it's being run by a weak and brittle leader, is going to be a weak and brittle business. And so for me, I wouldn't have been able to handle the anxiety. I wouldn't have been able to handle the pressure. I 10 years ago, I couldn't have built the business I built now, just because I didn't have that internal strength. I was focusing on the wrong things. I wouldn't even consider delegating to someone. And, or if I did, it would have been small stuff. And so my point is that in the process of working with him, he gave me a lot of emotional tools that helped me deal with that kind of pressure and not go into flights of fancy or into this downward spiral of anxiety and negativity and negative thinking.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's so funny. I'm just getting a laugh over here, because it's like, we really show up consistently if we watch ourselves, whether it's in business or in our personal lives. Our tolerance of chaos, our tolerance of challenge, the way we respond to it is pretty like uniform. And I think there's a lot of, growth to be had. If you do it on the personal level, fantastic. That's going to come over to the professional experience. If you do it on the professional level, fantastic. It's going to come over to the personal. But it reminds me, Daniel, this is a story, a really quick aside here. I have the privilege of having some still kids at Musicians Playground. So we have a very small base left, about 20% of our clientele. And we have fantastic families, and they're often parents that I wish, if I'm being honest, I had. They're really wonderful, loving, supportive, conscious parents. And I was teaching a 2.5 or 3-year-old the piano, one of my last kids. This was like probably a couple of years ago. And she's having a meltdown after the lesson because her nanny is not there, and she wanted to show her nanny whatever had happened in the lesson. So long story short, the father's there, and she's having a complete meltdown over a nanny not being there. So that this is relevant, I promise. He gets down on the floor with her and he said, "I see we're really sad right now." And he lets her continue to wail. He said, "How sad are we? Are we sad?" "Yeah, she's very sad." He said, "Very sad, somewhat sad, a little sad, not very sad." And here's a 2.5-year-old or 3-year-old learning to qualify her emotions, right? And I took a lot of actually learning from this moment, and how it relates to you, Daniel, is I think as we go through these situations, not just saying that you're a 2.5, we're not all 2.5-year-olds here.
I was going to make that joke if you didn't.
But I think some of us in our learning, maybe we missed this practice of qualifying. And I think it ties into what Nate was saying earlier, is like, how bad is this? Is this somewhat bad? Very bad? How panicked am I? Very panicked, a little panicked, right? I think there's like a lot of power in sitting with these emotions and learning to qualify. And I think what you're saying is that, like, this is an example of an experience that got you to practice that, and the coach helped you to see and ask those kinds of questions to really understand yourself on those levels. And maybe I'm reaching too far there in that assumption, but it just reminded me of that story.
Just 2 comments to that. It isn't as if even in the moment, in the panic, I could possibly even quantify how bad it was, because that irrationality was there. Again, not pushing back against what you're saying, just to say this, was that some things are going to hit harder for different people. And I think what was so helpful about what Dave did was the tools to respond to that and to question and be able to fully feel, as that father was doing with his,
Yes.
toddler there, to be able to fully feel it and not let it define us in the moment. So that's the
Yes.
first thing. The second thing is it just reminds me of a quote, and I can't remember where I heard it, but it might have been Alex Ramosi, but he said something, but the quote is, learn to deal with a level of pressure that would kill most people. And, I think you have to get there, but I mean, I've been through some pressure cookers in the business over the years. This was one of them. This episode is sponsored by grouplessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks.
I'm interested to know, Daniel, how did this happen? So how did you choose to get through it? Like, how did you ultimately respond after all those big feelings?
Yeah, the response and the solution are somewhat connected. And so the response at first it wasn't denial, but it was confusion. And I think this is actually really important for people to understand. Sometimes a crisis is huge. I mean, if someone threatens a lawsuit against you, it's immediate and it's in your face. The crisis for me, it took actually a little bit of time to realize it was happening, because we were looking, this went away, and then my immediate thought was, oh, well, we'll just go back to what we were doing before. And then we started doing that, but then the response we were getting wasn't like it was before. And then it was getting worse as we headed into 2022. And we had to actually go through several launch cycles for me to even say, yeah, there's a major problem here. I brought in Kirsten. We were looking at data. We were pulling together data, like looking at marketing and stats and this sort of thing. And we were just looking at a lot of things. All the meanwhile, revenue was lower. But then it kept going down. So it was like this slow slide, so to speak. And then my solution was, well, first, let's find a new Facebook person. Maybe that's just what we need. Went through that, nothing. Did not help at all. I think we got a few sales out of it, but I mean, it wasn't anything close to what we had done before. Then we started trying a number of other marketing methods, things that I, for a long time, had wanted to do. And we experimented here, we experimented there, did this, did that. Again, just anemic response. Meanwhile, I'm monitoring the metrics the whole time, and I'm not seeing positive signals. And I would say the solution, just to kind of wrap this up with a bow, the solution was we just kept working until we found something that worked. And we found a couple things that worked. We introduced a new product, which raised interest level in the business. And it was something that really there was no natural competitor for. I'm talking about Piano Express, of course. So there was that. We doubled down on social media, but in a way that we hadn't done from 2016 to 2020. And I invested a lot of money into team development around that because I knew I couldn't do it alone. And then the other thing was I started this podcast. I went to Nate because Nate had been a client of mine at the end of 2019. And Nate had said something during 2019, 2020, where he kind of had this desire to give back to the larger music world and wanted to share what he had learned at Brooklyn Music Factory. And there's other things. I would let Nate speak to that. Or you could go back to the early episodes even to hear what Nate's motivations were, because he talked about it at the time. And for years and years, I had back in my mind, I should start a podcast. I like long form better than I like short form. People had suggested this. Joy Morin suggested this to me. Tim Topham suggested this to me. Other people suggest this to me. I was like, I'll get to it eventually. Took us a full year almost to get this off the ground because I kept dragging my feet because I was experimenting with other things as well. But I would say a combination of just putting tons of money into social media, starting this podcast, introducing a new product, kind of turned things around to the point now that actually we are doing more revenue now than we were during that Facebook funnel, which had been like a gangbusters for us at the time. And so that was kind of the response and the solution. And if I could just, because the solutions were unique to me. I think the response is probably, there's something for those listening in the response. And that is just a persistence, even in the face of, this panic, tracking metrics. And I was thankful that I'd been tracking them prior to the crisis happening because I had a baseline to which I could compare. Mm-hmm. So if you're not doing that right now, if you ever get in a situation like this, or you will be glad that you'd been doing it during the good times. Even the understanding to understand those metrics, and then a willingness to take a risk because revenue was going down and our spend on marketing was going up. That is not an easy thing to do. You have to have a pretty strong stomach to be investing in a time where you think, oh, I should be saving. Oh my goodness, I need to save every dime possible. And I don't mind being this transparent. For a year or two there, my personal income went down because of this. Mm-hmm. I don't see this as an embarrassing thing or something to be self-conscious about. Like I'm the marketing guy. I'm supposed to, know business super well. Hey, this was an external threat. And these were things that were happening around me. And I would just say that and I'll shut up after this, all the self-education I did around business strategy, marketing metrics, marketing strategy helped me to identify what I look at in hindsight now as a very tough problem to diagnose and one where there was no apparent solution. We had to come up with one, and I brought the team on that to give me their perspective as well. And there was a lot of moving parts to all this, but I would say it was those things that I just mentioned here. Those are the takeaways. Those are the things that I would recommend that people do as a proactive measure to prevent something like this from happening, and then how to deal with it if something like this happened to you in your future.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Alyssa.
Wait, I have to ask Daniel something. I have to say
you got to follow up. Okay, fire.
So Daniel, I am so curious what it was inside of you that you accessed in order to continue to take action under such emotional pressure. Because I feel like there's a place we all have to kind of go, or there's some sort of logic, or there's something we have to come into touch with to take action that is so against how we are feeling.
Yeah, like your income's going down, Daniel. You're not getting the results you want, yet you're actually continuing to invest more in solutions. That's what I understood from your story. Yeah. And so I love this question because it's like that's what we're actually tapping into to take the risk.
Yeah. So I'm gonna make a comment here before I answer the question, but it's related. Alyssa, I don't know where this is going to air in relation to a video you and I are planning on doing, but Alyssa and I are working on a series of videos right now around more this internal part of business. And I would say that in 2016, and I don't want to steal the thunder from that video, but in 2016, the coach that I was working with at the time, Dave, Alyssa has heard me talk about him so much, she even knew I was talking about, gave me this tool that helped me question my own thinking. And it's called The Work. It's by this really incredible woman named Byron Katie. And when you are experiencing difficult emotions, either just internally or in relation to someone else, there is this method that she has that my coach taught me to question our thinking. Now, here's the thing. When you are in a crisis like this, more than likely your brain is going to go into overdrive, providing you a lot of thoughts to think.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are probably going to be threat level red. They're going to be really irrational. You're going to be tempted to believe the worst things possible. Oh, my word, this is never going to work. Oh, our school's switching to group lessons and all these parents are going to be so angry. Oh, our spring re-enrollment drive isn't as going as well. We're not hitting our targets. This fall is going to be terrible. And then you don't question the thought. The thought comes to your head because as a survival mechanism, humans are negative beings. It helps us survive. That's helpful if you're, on the savannah and you hear a lion roar 10,000 years ago. It's not so helpful in a modern professional working environment. The threats to us are overblown. And if you hear that and you're thinking, well, that doesn't feel right, it actually is. What was the real, was there any threat to my health or body or life? And ultimately what it comes down to is asking okay, so my income's going down. What's the worst thing that can happen? Tim Ferriss has an article about this called Fear Setting. I send this to clients all the time. Yeah, I should put this in the show notes. I'll link, it's a blog post he wrote 10 plus years ago. And the work combined with things like fear setting and just sitting in silence with things is kind of where that intestinal fortitude comes from. And I will just say this is what I do a lot of work. I don't talk about this publicly very often. People come to work with me all the time. I get requests every month to do work with clients. And they come for me to help their business. They know that I can offer a lot to them. This is the same is true for Alyssa. The same is true for Nate. What I feel I give a lot of clients that they didn't realize that they were getting in the bargain is this same iron, this iron that goes in, the steel that goes into your spine. Yes. And I teach a lot of the same tools and techniques that my coach gave me that have nothing to do with marketing metrics, although those are important. But becoming a better leader, that's where it's at. And so, Alyssa, I'm really glad you asked that question because it tested me it had tested me in a way that I'd never been tested before. There's only a few times where other things had come up in the context of, grow or that sort of thing where I felt, ooh, this is hard, or, oh man, I'm really getting freaked out here. But they weren't even close to this. And so this also dovetails into what I learned, because I know that that's kind of something we wanted to make sure that we communicated in this episode. But this was a humbling experience for me. This was the first time where I felt like, man, my marketing isn't working right now. And then I had to say, oh, no, that's a lie. It's working. It's just not as good as it was before. So we're going to have to up our game.
Mm-hmm. It's so what I'm hearing, and I just kind of want to recap this for any listeners. So far, it's a mix of things that I hear, Daniel, that you've learned, you've employed in the face of crisis. So what I'm hearing is, one of those things is that you sought external help from someone who could provide a more objective, potentially viewpoint and help you to strengthen the muscles that you are missing to get through this type of an experience, which a lot of what we're talking about is these emotional muscles that we absolutely need to be great leaders in, an ever challenging environment of being a business owner. And then another thing I heard is that there's actually quite practical resources that you've practiced and learned through the years, two of which you mentioned were Fear Setting by Tim Ferriss, and then The Work by Byron Katie, both fabulous resources, by the way. I couldn't echo the importance of the of those resources more. And so I'm sensing it's getting some help. It's, leaning into some of these practices that you've done on a regular basis. But what I see this is like the crisis is the game. The crisis is the game time. It's like we have our practices, right? We have our practices with the little things that come up with our coaching, our learning on an ongoing basis. But then the game is the crisis. That's where we really get to show how far we have come and how much we've really internalized these learnings, right? So are we missing anything as like listeners, that we could employ to think about how can I take Daniel's story and apply this to my own crisis?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add potentially, and then I want to kick it over to you, Alyssa, and I have some questions about your crisis, would be that when I went through this, I was 5 years out from that work I had done with my coach. And so I had been practicing this for a long time. And what's interesting is what I had come to him about, where he taught me these things, didn't feel nearly as crisis level. So like the thing that was going on in my life that I reached out to him about wasn't a crisis, but I was feeling it more strongly in my emotions than I even felt this. And so that's just kind of a testament to what he taught me and the power of it. But I would say that the best time to prepare is now. You know, that phrase, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. I'm glad I'd planted that tree 5 years prior. But in a way, the only reason I was in this situation is because I had done that work before, and it had grown me as a leader and allowed me to build a business that I didn't imagine that I had in me. And so I would just say that, if you're going through a crisis now, yeah, reach out. I can help you. But, if someone who's listening right now, Alyssa can help you. They can help you. But for me, like, I was really glad that these were well-practiced tools for me, anyway. So, I think we should kick it over to you, Alyssa.
Yeah. All right. Crisis time.
Yeah. So, I'm just going to ask point blank, like you asked me, what was your crisis? Maybe give us the high level summary and then we'll dig into it a little bit.
Yes. High level. I shall make this as quick as possible. So, 2018, I had a wonderful, simple, easy, joyous life. I was running Musicians Playground out of a live work building called the Piano Factory in Boston. I found that was actually a fantastic way to grow my business because I was able to live in the walk-in closet and the storage area of my apartment and put all of my money toward the business, right? And not have to have two rents. So that allowed me to grow a little bit faster. Questionable choices to live in storage and the closet. Don't recommend it for everybody. But all this just to say, 2018 comes around and we have a business that's doing well. I have 3-bedroom but it's all dedicated music rooms. I'm living outside of the building, which is not really legal at that time. And I have a team of about 5 teachers. I had gotten back from a trip from Portugal with my significant other, and I come to a notice under my door that says your business is to shut down by March 1st of this year. It was January 20th or something like this. So I'm stunned. I have no idea what this is about. I have no idea what to do. All I know is that I'm being asked legally to shut my business down in less than 2 months. So I kind of suspected it was due to the neighbors upstairs really getting pissed off about, the music for 12 hours a day. I would be too. I also understand that I was in a live work building that was meant to support artists that were likely more of like a private lesson scale. And I think I was given an inch and I took like a mile with this situation. So I think that's kind of why this happened. I take full accountability, but I think, Daniel, something you said in your story, which resonated with me in this time is sometimes, and I always go here in these podcasts, I know people listening are like, oh, there she goes. But the universe has a really great way of saying you're ready to level up. And oftentimes it comes with these kinds of very jarring situations.
Yeah.
So I think it was the universe saying, Alyssa, we know your dream, and your dream is too big for this space. It's too big for who you are and what you're doing right now. You've outgrown this chapter, you've outgrown yourself, and you're ready for this new challenge, this new forced event to help you to level up. So what this did is it ensued a wild chase of trying to find a new location of where our current home for Musicians Playground is in downtown Crossing, beautiful 3,000 square feet. It's everything I dreamed of and more. If I look back at like my life plans from my early 20s, it was everything I wrote down that I wanted. So, and it's big enough to encompass my dreams finally, but the path to getting there was incredibly challenging and stressful. I have to say it was the first time I ever really went through something legal like that. And I had to actually like figure out, well, who do I turn to in this? What are my rights? Like, is this true? Do I really have to shut down in a month? What do I do? Are we going to be homeless? The average time to find a commercial space, as Nate knows very well, is a long time in a bigger city. It's not, just a couple month ordeal. It's usually a year and a half. You have to do a build out. You have to raise a lot of money. Like this is a big deal. And in addition to that, I got 200 no's in the process of finding a new space because no one wants a bunch of musicians in their office building. So it was rough. It was rough. And there was several mini crises, obviously, in that path of getting evicted to then finding our new home. And those mini crises were also, extremely packed with learning. For example, when we had to, find another kind of holdover space because the new space wasn't ready, and we had to do 2 moves in a period of 8 months. So our down to when we were supposed to sign our lease in that summer in a new space, the day of the lease signing, it went sideways. The guy decided he didn't want to sign us. So put us back to square one. So that gave me, a total of 3 or 4 months just to figure out where are we going to go. And again, a year and a half, 3 or 4 months, it's not looking likely, not looking good. So these are all a bunch of really, really tricky situations within the greater context of one big one, which is getting an eviction notice under your door and being forced to shut your business down and having to navigate that. So yeah, I'd say that was the crises, and I'd say it was definitely the start of a lot of gray hair for me. My hairdresser saw me a lot more the ensuing years. So,
Oh man. So Alyssa, just you asked this of me. I'm curious. I'm going to ask it right back at you. Turnabout's fair play. What did you feel during this time?
Oh gosh, I think the initial experience, I think so. This is what I was mentioning earlier about personal, like how I respond personally to challenge or chaos is how I show up in every space. I was numb. I think I was like an empty shell of a person for probably like a good day or two in disbelief, maybe that this was happening. And then it started like slowly settling in the grimness of what this was. And then it was sheer panic, like you said, Daniel. Like it was like, oh my God. And it was extreme thinking. I'm going to lose my business. Everything's going to shut down. I'm going to have to start from zero. If I want, I'm going to have to go work for a corporate office. Like you can't imagine the thoughts I was having. I was thinking, where do I put my resume out? Like I wasn't even, thinking logically about the problem anymore. I was actually like reformatting my entire identity and self around this. So there was that period. And then there was a period of anger. Well, I'm going to show them I'm going to hire the best attorney and I'm going to fight this and I'll go to jail if I need to. Let the sheriff come, And then there, and then there was the period of defeat where I was tired. I just wanted to cry and, live a simpler life and not deal with any of this and just give up, right? So you can tell there's like a lot of
well, you're describing the 5 stages of grief almost here. Exactly. No, I'm being serious. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally acceptance.
That's right. And I think acceptance came for me far after everything was resolved. was like, I was still suffering from like the trauma of all of it, probably 2 years after it happened. And finally I looked up and I'm like, oh, like it worked. It's okay. And actually, ironically, that came for me like last year because we had COVID. Let's not forget, we had COVID right after all of this happened. So it was like and that's another crisis for all of us listening. Like, it was like we all had to shut down. The universe was like, all of you done. You're doing virtual lessons and good luck, like competing in that space. Right. So it was like two big crises or chaos points where like then far after, so here we are 2024, I'm finally like, thank goodness that happened. Like, thank goodness I accept this fully now. I trust fully, like we're good. We've arrived. But yes, it was a whole lot of experiences, emotionally speaking. And I definitely, like you, Daniel, leaned into support. I had to get legal support. I had to get some coaching around some of these issues. I had to rely on my partner at the time quite a bit for some emotional sanity, right? And I think ultimately just really take it day by day, like every day, just like wake up and try to figure out what I could do with that 24 hours to get one step closer to something that felt more comfortable for me.
There's this book by David Nagel that I listen to and reread definitely every year. It's called The Millions Within. And, it may be off-putting to some, but I absolutely love it. And it was recommended by a friend in my mastermind. And she was a big fan. And I was just listening to it actually this summer as I was working on a new project. And he has one of the most simple ideas that is not new, but it reminds me of what you just said, which is like action begets action. That's it. Like you don't even know. Oftentimes we don't even see the opportunity when we're paralyzed in one of those 5 stages of grief, which, Daniel, I think you're just spot on by laying that out, right? We're on a roller coaster. This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons. And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games. I'm just curious, like, obviously, one of this, you outlined a few solutions, like, yes, you did use an attorney. Yes, you did recognize that you needed a new space. Yes, you did go find a new space. I know you and I had a bunch of great conversations, and I was always impressed. You were like, I built team. I had a realtor. I did all the things I needed to do to act, right?
Yeah.
Were there any other parts of the solution that you wanted to share? And then just sort of maybe you could dovetail from there into like maybe a few essential lessons learned from this, like what sounded like a 2 to+ solving.
Yes. Here's another thing I'll throw in as like a part of the solution, which was how I had to show up, and kind of related to what Daniel was talking about earlier, and like in a question we asked around like, how did you act even though you were acting against everything you felt inside? So when we found finally this like one yes for the space we're in now, and I've already on other episodes shared more details around like the risk I took, right? It was like 4 times the cost of my other location. I had, unlike Daniel with his KPIs, I had 0 KPIs. I couldn't even tell you how many clients we had, how much we were making, how much we were spending. And I went against the advice of one of my closest mentors who told me not to sign the lease and to keep looking and to not worry about a complete shutdown, that it would be less risky ultimately than signing the lease, jumping in, taking on too much debt, and then potentially filing for bankruptcy. But I signed the lease, right? And so I think one thing I want to say is that when we got into this space, I had signed the lease. I still had to close and raise close to $50,000. I had no idea where that was going to come from. We had 2 weeks to do it. And I show up, most people show up with a team, like an architect, a designer, right? And I show up and the realtor for the building is there. And I'm with my realtor. And then their realtor says, "Is your architect coming?" And I look at her and I say, "I am the architect."
There you go. Be who you need to be in the moment.
She said, "Is your designer coming?" I said, "I am the designer too." So why I say this is because you have to wear confidence, unshakable confidence. You have to live as the person you know you will be on the other side of the crisis, right? You have to truly embody that spirit with everything you are worth, right? And what I did do right in all of these situations is I wore an incredible poker face. I was extremely afraid, but I showed up and I said I was an architect. Maybe some people call it, again, borderline deluluness or delusionalness, right? But I think that that is actually our best friend in crisis, to put on a little extra deluluness, to be a little extra confident, to maybe be as we know we will be after we're done with all of it, right? And I think that that was another part of the solution, ironically, was acting the part before I was the part. Does that make sense?
I love that. And to be clear, for someone who's helped navigate 3 different homes for Brooklyn Music Factory, the first 2 homes, no, let's see here. Yeah, I'd say the first 2, I was the architect, the designer. It all lived on a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I would sketch it, and I would go to our contractor and be like, "What do you think?" Or we were the contractor. I was like, "I can paint, I can hammer."
Oh, yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah, exactly.
so anyways, be who you need to be. I love that. The unshakable confidence, that needs to be one of the key takeaways from this. That should be the title of this episode, Daniel. Crises. How to manage crises with unshakable confidence.
Confidence, exactly.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So I
I'm gonna
guess
write that
what I
down.
learned, I don't know. So there was a lot of learning. One thing that's really relevant for a lot of listeners, the studio owners, that even though my situation was very unique to me, I think that they could apply very readily to their situation, is I had a lot of assumptions. And whenever crises pop up, they challenge our assumptions. And the more connected or married we stay to those assumptions, the more stifled we're going to be moving through it. So what I mean by this is, for example, I always thought my business has to look a certain way, or has to exist in a certain space, or it has to, X, Y, or Z thing. We moved twice. At one point, we were operating just as a holdover in some sketchy part of downtown Boston that was like 800 square feet, smaller than by 400 or 500 square feet our first space. And it had a spiral staircase inside of it. It was totally meant to be a WeWork, like mini, like office space, not a classroom at all, or like a studio at all. And we converted this into our music studio, and it worked. Like, I've operated, as I said, in an apartment before. Like, it's amazing how when you just open up to creative possibility, and in this case, it was forced upon me to do that because we had no other option. We didn't see a huge dip in the business. It was amazing. People followed us. I'd say we were able to retain through all of that chaos. We were able to retain about 80% of our base. So it's pretty unbelievable if we just kind of like latch on and trust that like our assumptions will be challenged, but just to see what happens. And I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised by the outcome, that it's not at all what we thought had to happen in order for things to succeed or for us to get through it. So I think that was one of my major learnings. The second learning, after now going through, Daniel, Nate, I'm sure you guys can agree with this, after looking back in arrears and seeing all the times that crises have personally and professionally broken out, I have learned that they're actually gifts. I've actually now gotten to a point where when something so chaotic happens to me, I'm like, ooh, what am I supposed to start now? What is space being made for now? What is the gift on the other side of this now? Because just like in nature, there are natural cycles. There are fires, wildfires, right? That reset everything. And they have to happen for new birth, for new growth. And if we're judging the new birth or the new growth, the little buds that are coming up comparative to our old garden, we're going to be very disappointed. But if we wait patiently after that wildfire happens and that new growth happens, we're going to see on the other side of that these crazy opportunities like Daniel, you were mentioning. You're now doing your podcast, you're doing a lot of other things in your career that if things had just continued the way they were, you would have never had space for. So I think that the crises are actually now for me, I've gotten to a point where I welcome them full-heartedly and I'm giddy about it because I wonder what's on the other side of it. So.
And I will just say that I think that is the theme I was seeing drawn out here. And I already know Nate had kind of mentioned what he was going to talk about, and we're going to hit him in just a second. These things came upon us. We didn't ask for them. They were wholly external to us. It wasn't something we could control. We had to respond to it. And then what was created out of it was something new, and it forced us to level up. And I also just wanted to say, what you were just saying there, Alyssa, reminds me of a quote from Jerry Seinfeld. Pain is just knowledge rushing in to fill a gap you didn't know you had.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And, he's made me laugh, and now he makes me cry with that quote. Anything else, Alyssa, or should we kick it over to Nate?
No, Nate, we must hear the ultimate crises of your life.
It's not of the life, but I'm not going to go into too many details about the actual crises because it's very similar to yours. In 2016, Brooklyn Music Factory had a 15-year lease in our first location, and the landlords got into trouble doing a renovation on the building. They ended up losing the building. We ended up losing our home, and we were homeless as a school for 6 months with an enrollment of, I just went back and looked at our enrollment in 2016. We had 210 private lesson students, 220 group class students, and 350 camp students. And we needed to relocate those. We had a fully booked camp that we needed to relocate, summer camp, 350 students in that. And we were, I think that was the year that we broke the 7-figure mark that year. It was like 2016. So anyways, homeless for 6 months, no idea what to do, very similar to yours. So I'm not going to go into the details of the why. Doesn't really matter. The response actually and lessons learned, I think, are much more important. But I am going to share this. It's similar to Daniel in that was when I knew I 100% needed outside help. Like, it was, what's so ironic, it was the same year that we won Small Business of the Year at a marketing and sales conference. Yeah. And there was a picture of me holding a huge cardboard check, making, a $10,000 check. And do you want to know what I did with that check, Alyssa? I literally turned around and wrote a $10,000 check to the same people and asked for coaching. Oh! I wrote a $20,000 check. So those are like, and I remember, and I was talking about this, Daniel, we talked about this on a previous pod, but I remember thinking at the time, I graduated from college in 1992, I was like, wait, this was more than my college tuition. I was like, wow. For a year, I was spending this on coaching. So anyways, that's not actually the entire response, of course, to finding a new home. I'll get into some details in a moment, but I am just going to highlight that is actually when I was like, dude, we're not waiting for the help. Like, if there was ever a sign that you need help, now's the sign. that here you have this business that's creeping up to 7 figures. You have hundreds of students enrolled, and you've just lost your home.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's the crisis. Maybe I'll just talk about how it felt at the moment, and then I can ping it back to you for any follow-ups before we dig into lessons learned. But I think at the time, the feeling I had was, I'm such an idiot. I had put so much faith into this relationship with the landlords that owned the building. In fact, at one point, you guys, Pira, my business partner, and I presented them with a purchase order. We were going to buy shares in the building. So we were going to put equity into the long-term home because, it's New York City. Real estate's a great investment if you're going to play the long game, et cetera. And we were absolutely been playing the long game. I've been living in the same neighborhood in the same home for nearly 30 years now, and Brooklyn Music Factory's always been in the Gowanus neighborhood. So we weren't playing the short game. This wasn't like looking for a quick win. So we actually sat down with them and were very close. We made a concrete offer. We were looking to raise money to buy equity into the building. So my first feeling was like both feeling of being totally let down in this relationship with these building owners that I knew well and had known in different contexts in the community. And then also just like, man, because this was my responsibility in our business was managing the relationship with the landlords, ensuring we had a long-term home. And I felt so dumb, honestly, in the moment. I was like, I can't believe I had so much faith that this was going to work out.
Wow.
It was like pretty humbling, actually, back to what you were saying, Daniel, in your experience. Just like you were supposed to be the one who was an expert in this field, and you were being really humbled. And it was like, I definitely felt that way at the time.
Wow. That's hard, Nate.
Nate, what would you do different now that you've gone through that in your approach? I feel like what I was hearing in your story was like that this was due to negligence on the side of the landlord. And I don't see that that's your responsibility at all, but I also don't know the details of it. So my question really is there things that you could have really done to prevent that? Is there any part of that you really own, or would you do anything differently now that you've gone through that?
So 100%, because the wisdom comes with time through these opportunities. What looks like, as you said, what looks like a total challenge is actually an opportunity, or you put it as a gift, that opportunity came again in the pandemic, right? There we were in COVID, and I was like, oh, wait, I'm seeing the exact same scenario again. Here I am homeless. At that time, we were 680 students. So now we're much larger than we were in 2016. And the thing I did differently was I acted way faster in the pandemic to get out of that lease, spend $90,000 to remove end the lease, and go straight into finding our next home where we are now.
Yeah.
Talk about the universe teeing you up. Like, it just gives you the exact same situation. And there must have been some satisfaction in that pattern match between what happened before and here, and you knowing how to operate now. I don't know. That really strikes me. I don't know if I have more to say than that.
Well, I mean, what would we do differently? That's very much aligned with our final question, which is really lessons learned, right? So the solution is fun and funny and kind of crazy. Like, we rented 2 different locations. We had a walking map. We hired walkers. We walked students from one location to a next location. We rented, Alyssa, you'll totally vibe this. We rented the basement of a brownstone in Park Slope as our 3rd location. So we literally, dead of winter, you can just picture like teachers walking students up the hill to their private lesson, waiting, then walking them down to their band class in another. It was just like, it was so awesome and sounds insane to even say out loud. But one of the things I did in prep for this episode is I pulled up our SMART, right? We created a whole project map around this. because we had an amazing team at that point. And it was we titled the crisis Operation Orange. We titled the pandemic Operation Apple. So we've had like multiple crises, and we've named them after fruit. And so I pulled up the Operation Orange Smart, which is literally like this massive list of all the things we were going to do, by when, who was owning each task, etc. But in the folder, I clicked through, and it was just a battalion and king killer and brownstone walking schedule, Monday through Saturday. I'm like, I'm literally reading this walking schedule, and I'm like, wow.
Wow.
Like when your back is against the wall, you will do anything
Anything. Yes.
to maintain relationships and follow through on your promise. You know,
Oh,
I mean, I'm sure Daniel, I had this exact same thoughts at the same time, which was like, wow, well, there goes my, I mean, I put all my eggs in this basket. There was no backup plan for Nate or my partner, Pira. So we were looking at it going like, wait, my income, like, how are we going to make, we had just hired Jessica, my wife, literally had just hired her. And this was the first thing she managed.
welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome. Totally. And so we were like, how are we going to make more? Like, how are we going to pay for our life? Because we just put both eggs in this basket. Yeah. So, but I would say in response to your comment, Daniel, you're absolutely right. Some of the lessons I learned from from Operation Orange, I'm not even going to call it a crisis because I'm going to call it an opportunity. Operation Orange, the ultimate opportunity. The first one was that, and Alyssa, you talked about this, like, there's no chance of me solving this on my own. Mm-hmm. There was no chance of me. So I did not know how to manage 420 customers after school and another 350 in camp by myself. Plus, I'm not like my makeup is not project management. You know, I'm not like a detailed guy who moves everything ahead day by day. Mm-hmm. And so that first lesson learned was like, number one, know exactly what I bring to the table. You know, be very clear, like, Nate, you're good at just a few things, so bring those to the table full force. You know, so for example, I'm a motivator, facilitator, I'm a leader. I'm a classic gather everyone together, gather the team, make a friggin' slide deck, which I'm sure I did, of the vision for the future, talk about how I believe in everybody getting us there, and then just make sure I repeat that story over and over every week in our weekly meeting. Show them the pictures of the possibilities, where we can go next, what can happen. Tell stories about families that are still happy, even though we're walking them up the hill through the snow to their basement lesson in a brownstone. You know, so number one, that's my role. The other part that I leaned into was like, and I wrote this for myself, you guys, like, what can I do with ease and flow? Or with joy, like, I call those things the same thing. What can I do with ease and flow? So our listeners totally know, like, I am a numbers guy. Financial fluency is massive to me. I can forecast the future, or I try to, when it comes to the dollars and cents, that part of the fuel for the business. And so I did exactly that in this case. When you talk, Daniel, about metric dashboards, I was writing notes in my book, and I was like, what was my metric dashboard? Oh yeah, I was definitely going to our marketing director and asking for leads and sales and that kind of thing. But I was like, oh, my number one dashboard that I looked at consistently was our money dashboard. Mm-hmm. I was looking at revenue we were retaining. Alyssa, back to you, holding on to 80% of your clients. Mm-hmm. You know, revenue we were retaining, how much it was going to cost to open our next location. We burnt an enormous amount of cash renting 3 different places. Mm-hmm. And we burnt another chunk of cash hiring a whole bunch of staff to walk students everywhere.
And moving.
And right? Not even, you know, yeah, moving. We moved so many times. You know, it reminded me of like moving my mother, who was a visual artist her whole life. And I would move her from studio to studio, like a dozen moves in my adult life, just like a printing press, 1,000 works of art. Like I was like, the moving part actually wasn't even that scary to me, all the gear and everything. But that's the second piece, was like lean into what we're really, really good at, or at least we believe we are, Alyssa. Like, know what you can do, or know that you're going to be responsible for that and going to have to learn the skills to do it. Right. And then just to put a button on this, I'll ping it back to you guys for some follow-ups, because I have a few other lessons learned. But for us, it took a team to implement. And my org chart for that team, I went back and looked at our whole folder. It was like in prep. I was like, opened up a 2016 folder, Operation Orange, to look at the team. And it was like, okay, motivator, facilitator equals leader. Okay, that's me. I needed someone who was going to own the project. That became Jessica. She was the owner of the whole thing. Like, if we actually could retain this number of families and survive this, she was the owner of that entire thing, right? The next role we had is we needed a project manager. We needed someone who was actually just going through that SMART task by task, being like, hey, there's a due date on this. So-and-so, are you able to do this? So for example, literally, it's like you said, who's packing up all the gear? We did a complete inventory of all of our equipment. Who's doing the inventory? How do we know if we still have 90% of the equipment we packed up after we open up our new location, because stuff gets lost or stolen or whatever? Who knows what happens, So there was just so many different tasks. So that was, at the time, that was Kai, or he was moving into a director of operations role, and he managed that. He was managing the day-to-day, whereas Jessica was making sure that the families were all happy, and she was owning the project as a whole. And then finally, we just had a whole bunch of people that were executing. So did we reach out to teachers and be like, hey, we want to give you more responsibility beyond the classroom? Hell yes, we did. We were like, who can show up and help us unpack? Who can show up and help us paint some studios? Who wants to make some extra cash doing X, Y, or Z? Yeah, we're reaching out to everybody. And if we couldn't do it internally, we were hiring externally, Yeah. So that was our main, that's one of about 3 or 4 key lessons learned from that experience. Looking back, Daniel, just bring it full circle. That's exactly what we applied to COVID and closing a home and opening a new home. Same exact model. We literally cut and paste the SMART. We used the same project planning.
It's like you get to create your own SOP for managing this
Yeah.
kind of experience.
Yes, totally. For managing crises, a moving crisis.
Yeah, moving crisis SOP.
Oh my word.
Yeah, or step 1, meltdown. Step 2, not for too long. Step 3, start taking action. Below are the steps.
Yeah. Yes.
Nate, I just wanted to comment really briefly on something, which is obviously we have a variety of listeners. Some are maybe, like you, who have a very big team, a very big operation. Some are maybe a little smaller. And I say that with the most love in my heart. Maybe they're just beginning, or just the nature of their operation is just they're a solopreneur without a whole team around them. But I think, the big thing is that team doesn't have to just mean our professional team.
Yes.
It can mean, maybe it's a partner, or maybe, so I think identifying where do we need the support, and who are those trusted people in our network for that support. And it doesn't have to look like our employees, right? It can be a lot of even personal people in our life. So it's just important to remember that these are the times we have to learn to reach outside of ourselves and to identify the things we're needing and where we can most safely get that support. And it can be anybody or anything.
Yeah, Alyssa, and there are lots of people that want to help you grow your studio.
Yeah.
But they actually don't care about the studio, the business. They care about your vision for how you're benefiting, your customers. And so getting back to what I said about leaning into the thing that you as a listener bring to the table, it's that vision. It's why you ever started the thing in the first place. So will your partner help you? Of course, he, she, they will always help you, because they're your partner and they're like, well, I want to see you happy, But beyond that circle, you're so right. All you have to do is present a vision. It can be warts and all. Just give it a shot and be like, reach out to that uncle who is an architect.
Yes.
Reach out to that aunt who maybe is really good with money. Maybe she's an accountant or whatever, and be like, would you just give me an hour a week to help me with this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But she just needs to hear the vision of where you're going to go next once you get through over this hurdle. Because everybody else out in our world, they have their own mini crises that are happening right now, right? So they don't want to get sucked into a crisis. They want to get tapped as part of the opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Was there anything else, Nate, that you learned that you feel would be good to share with listeners in terms of how you moved through your crisis and what came out on the other side?
I'm going to just give one other piece that might feel a little bit slippery to our listeners, but there's always negotiating happening. And if you don't feel like you're a strong negotiator, then that is absolutely a hard, and it's both a soft plus hard skill that is well worth investing time and energy into. I wish I have a couple favorite books that I like and people on this, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. So I'm just going to say that when managing a crisis, one of the lessons I learned is that there's absolutely someone whose job it is to negotiate all the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I said that we rented 3 different places. Well, that was my job. My job was to go out, find places, manage the relationships, sign whatever short term, the best possible deal I could, and make it happen. Ending old relationships. So severing ties with our previous landlord. That was my job. I had to negotiate the exit there so that it ended on the best possible terms for us. Right. Managing relationships with the families while Jessica was director of family communications. At the end of the day, Alyssa, like I took NPS surveys and I surveyed our families through this crisis, and I was managing some of the more difficult relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there were long-term customers, long-term families that we'd been serving that were like, what the hell's going on? And it doesn't mean that I have to sound like I know exactly what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to listen and validate what they're feeling and say we do have a plan. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to maintain and develop their faith in Brooklyn Music Factory that we will continue to serve them for years to come. So that was the last little lesson, is like, consider yourself the lead negotiator and the one who manages all the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not just to be clear, for example, when we opened up our current space, at that point I was like, I'm definitely not the architect. I'm no longer playing architect. So
Yeah.
I reached out to Joel, who was the architect on our home years prior.
Mm-hmm.
And he helped me put a bathroom in my home studio. And I was like, dude, I don't exactly know what's going to happen next. And I know you've never designed a music school, but what do you say? I 100% can't afford your full fee. But what do you think about this kind of new challenge? Like, design a community center with me. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yeah, I'll totally do it.
Wow.
And we of course, like I went to his office and I brought him food and all the things that you do
Yeah.
to develop relationships. But he did it for a fraction of his fee. And it was a really, really fun opportunity to work together. So that's what I mean by developing
Yeah.
those relationships in your
You know,
network. So
I think it ties in nicely to kind of what we were saying earlier, which is these crises challenge our assumptions. And I think even those assumptions can relate to how we feel people can or will help us in these moments. And so it's important to stay open to the fact that, we may actually be pleasantly surprised by the circle that surrounds us and the ways in which they're able to support us, as we just be brave enough to ask for that and enlist that help, right? And so I think it's, again, to that point, like, we cannot stay so married to our assumptions. We have to open up. We have to be, courageous to see what could be possible. And that applies to people as well.
yeah, 100%. It's like Daniel said, when you get to that final stage of acceptance, then you're ready and willing to look at the opportunity and to manage your assumptions.
I mean, I don't know, or you just never get there and you take action anyway, and then you
Yes.
arrive there 4 years later.
Totally. However you got to roll it, just keep moving forward.